So the Commonwealth Foundation has gone ahead and done something that nobody expected them to do. The foundation named Jamir Nazir, a Trinidadian writer, as the overall winner of their 2026 Short Story Prize. So not only did Jamir Nazir win the Caribbean Prize, but now he's the overall winner of the Short Story Prize. And if you've been following this story, you know that this is exactly what people didn't expect them to do. And if you haven't, then this is a perfect video for you. Stay with me as I explain what this controversy is and how an AI witch hunt is ensuing out of this. Hi, my name is Garnet and I make content for people who are curious about how AI and the internet collide with culture across the world. And today I'll be talking about the AI witch hunt that's in literature with the Commonwealth Short Story Prize as the center of this YouTube video. Don't forget to share this video with people who may be interested so that they can discover more of my content. I am a struggling YouTuber right now and I will appreciate any like, any follow, any comment, any subscription that you will give me. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's dial it back to May when the Commonwealth Foundation and Granta announced the regional winners of their 2026 Short Story Prize. And the 2026 Caribbean Region Prize went to Jamir Nazir for his short story, The Serpent in the Grove. The Serpent in the Grove is a story about a man who gets lustful over the local turban bartender, and in a flash of foolhardy decides to try and kill his wife so that he can live out his future with the bartender. This man, his name is Vishnu Muhammad, sets up a trap for his wife on an old abandoned well that no one ever goes to. He then pours out the little water that's left in the house and nudges his wife to go and fetch water from this well instead of making the entire trip to the place that she usually fetches water from. She of course falls for the trap, goes to fetch water and falls into the well. Before she went to fetch water, she had sent her son to go play at a neighbor's house, and this neighbor gets a bad feeling and goes to try and check in on the woman. Her name is Sita. The neighbor comes, finds out that Sita has fallen into the well and immediately starts trying to save her. Vishnu notices that this woman is saving Sita and he joins in because he doesn't want to go to jail. Eventually, the story goes against what you expect. You expect that the woman will die. She is saved and her life is never the same again. She's always on edge. She never trusts again. And in the end, it flashes forward to her son visiting the old well with his daughter, remembering what almost happened to his mom. For me, the end was a bit thick, so I'm not really sure how it ends. But yeah, that should be a bit of the blurb about the story. Jamir obviously has a way with words and you could see through the writing and the metaphors. I liked the setting. It's an important issue. There's so many stories you see of men committing femicide in a situation where a simple separation or divorce could have sufficed. So I thought it was a good story. So what exactly would make a short story that clearly beat out all the others and has been described by judges who have a lot of credibility in the literature space as precise and richly evocative? What would make that short story set off AI alarm bells? To understand, we have to dive into the piece. And from the first line of the story, you can already see the so-called telltale signs of AI writing. They say the grove still hums at noon. Not the bee's neat industry or the clean rasp of cutlass on vine, but a belly sound as if the earth swallows a shout and holds it there. And there are two classic telltale signs of AI. First off, you immediately see the negative parallelism, commonly referred to as the if not X then Y framework that AI really loves. And then another one that's interesting is the humming. Apparently AI models love to make things hum. And on Reddit, I found a post that was describing this, saying everything hums: the hum of the city street, the hum of the fluorescent light, the hum of the engine, the hum of the refrigerator. And we see this in the intro line where the grove is humming, but also in several sentences across the piece. It's a lot of humming for one piece. Even I must admit the amount of times he uses hum across this short story is strange to me, because as somebody who writes, I know that the natural instinct is to want to avoid overuse of one word or one stylistic device. Like if I wrote something hums at the intro, I definitely wouldn't pepper it throughout the piece like this. But once again, every writer has their own style, so that could be debatable. Back to the negative parallelism, you do see a couple of uses of this. So here are other sentences I found with negative parallelism. So it's not literal, it's not X then Y. but it does follow that flow or framework of negating the first thing and then giving a counterpoint in the second part of the sentence. The other AI telltale synctatic signs you can see throughout the piece are the use of threes. This one, for me, this was mostly in like the poetry part. And this is officially called the triadic anaphora, where anaphora is repetition, so repetition of threes. You see that in the part where the author writes, the grove knows, sit anew, marsh anew. In another part, the grove remembered, the house remembered, the boy remembered. I personally don't know if this is the rule of threes. I just think it's a stylistic device that he wanted to follow through with, but again, debatable. Another classic AI telltale sign in the piece was the lots of metaphors used. The author really loves metaphors, and a lot of people felt like some of the metaphors did not make sense, but as somebody who read it, I feel like metaphors can be deeply nuanced and contextual. For instance, I saw somebody complain about a line in the story. He uses a simile. He says, the air clung thick as porridge skin, and somebody on Twitter was like, I immediately shut down after I saw that. Then if you've ever drunk porridge made out of maize meal flour, actually almost any type of porridge, you see that a film like skin forms at the top. It's a bit shiny at the top, but it's also a thick layer. So when he says the air clung thick as porridge skin, I can visualize it because I've seen porridge. If you've never drunk porridge, maybe you can't understand that metaphor. People felt like the overuse of metaphors was very AI centric, and as somebody who has often told ChatGPT to stop using metaphors, I can understand that, but I also feel like metaphors are deeply cultural. If you don't get it, then perhaps you just don't understand the comparison. And the last one is the overly complex sentences. AI models tend to waffle about in very long, hard to understand sentences. And I have to admit, when I read this short story, I already had an idea what the general plot was about. I had an idea that it was about a man who tries to kill his wife. But if I hadn't read a blurb somewhere, I probably would have been lost throughout the short story, because there were moments I had to like read something 4 or 5 times to try and understand what the writer was saying. But also sometimes the similes or the metaphors they mix. Here I was saying that metaphors are contextual, but here I am about to read a couple of similes and metaphors that I didn't understand. But anyway, I definitely agree. I've contradicted myself there. It was a bit hard to understand at some point. I'm going to read some of the sentences I wrote down as I was reading it. The girl smiled like sunrise over a sink. Maybe I can picture smiling like sunrise, but over a sink, I'm not sure what that means. White rum, hot as apology. She had the kind of walking that made benches become men. I don't know what that means. Another day, he spilled a pail and grimaced at a taste he invented. And the final line I wrote down, she was big in the way of women who never apologized to furniture. It took me a couple of reads to try and understand that, and I still don't understand it. So hey, here I was judging people who were saying the metaphors were complex and hard to understand, but simply identifying that actually that was a problem. It was a bit overly complex and too roundabout. I personally don't even know if I'm the best judge for this. People write in complex ways, and I personally prefer to read simpler books, and I think that's why an author like Chimamanda or Aminata Forna or even J.K. Rowling, I find their writing really like striking or engaging. Is that the word? I find their writing really beautiful because they use simple words but in such complex ways. I don't know how to describe it, but they basically write simply, but they tell beautiful stories. And I'm usually attracted to such kind of writing. Like I personally would not read like a Wole Soyinka just because I genuinely don't have the depth to get through the complex language in there. And quite frankly, I don't see the need for myself. Gosh, this is why they're saying there's a literary crisis, because of people like me who are rejecting hard books. The conversation online about whether this short story is AI written or not is heating up. Granta and Commonwealth both don't know what to do, and even how to ascertain whether this piece is genuinely AI generated or if it was human written. And so eventually the Commonwealth Foundation defends its process, says that they do not use AI checkers because this is unpublished work. You don't want to put unpublished work into an AI model. Granta does the opposite. Granta is a bit more strict about their response to this. At first, they delete the story from their website, and then they release a statement. They say that they decided to check the short story with Claude, and Claude found telltale signs of AI writing. Decides to separate itself from the Commonwealth Prize because their position is that Commonwealth Foundation had editorial oversight, but because the Commonwealth Foundation did not do enough due diligence, it is affecting their brand as Granta magazine. And if you know about Granta, it's one of the places where writers like Chimamanda Akwaeke Emezi were discovered by the general public. So it has a history of producing some of the best new writers. And a small company known as Pangram that does AI detection in text and is supposed to be the best in class in AI detection steps into this whole controversy and assesses the work and finds that this short story is 100% AI generated. They also look at other winners over the years to see who has been using AI, and they found that 4 other winners in the 2026 pool, so 3 from 2026 and 1 from 2025, who are regional winners, may have used AI to some extent, with some ranging from 88% to others apparently completely generating their short stories with AI, which is insane. And Pangram is said to only have a 1 in 10,000 error rate. This is a really low margin of error, especially in a context where people don't really trust AI detectors, but also worry that the decision that comes out of an AI detector could be so impactful to somebody's life. And I was curious myself to test out Pangram's claim, because I was like, okay, if they say they can detect AI generated writing so well, let me test my own draft. So I had written a Substack post recently, and the way I write is I do 100% of my first draft by myself, no AI use, just from my brain onto the paper. And then I now edit, like I use AI as an editor to like ask me questions that would make my argument stronger. But another reason why I wanted to use it was because I had already put this unedited first draft into Claude, and I wanted to see if maybe memorization would cause maybe Pangram to detect AI even though there wasn't any AI text in there. And so I checked my work, and Pangram found that my work was 100% human generated. So that was interesting. I also tested my work with Claude because I was interested in that divergence between what Granta found with the Claude check versus what Pangram found. Said that there were some signs that it was AI assisted. Pangram on the other side said that it was 100% AI generated. So I wanted to see if there was any divergence in this. But Claude also said my work was 100% accurate. But another test I did gave an interesting answer. As I was writing this script, I saw a paper that was trending all over social media. And the paper is called Storyscope, Investigating Idiosyncrasies in AI Fiction. The premise of this paper is that detecting the authorship of a story or a piece of work by stylistic choices alone is not accurate enough. We know that with every update an AI model releases, AI writing style change. And sometimes it is intentional. When people complained about ChatGPT writing containing a lot of M dashes, an update in GPT 5.4 significantly reduced how many M dashes were used in writing from ChatGPT. And researchers found that the accuracy for detection of the type of writing that came out of GPT 5.4 reduced from 97% to 3%. So these researchers are saying AI models are fine-tuned all the time. So these stylistic choices or these telltale signs of AI are not static. Another reason I can think of is bias. Remember the Delve situation where tech bros in Silicon Valley were talking about the use of of delve as a sign that somebody used AI in their writing. But a lot of Africans who trained ChatGPT spoke about how Africans tend to use more formal language and more formalized words than a Westerner in America or the UK would. And this phenomenon was just mimicking how the people who reinforced the training were writing. And so they propose a methodology that they call Storyscope, which moves away from looking at the words and the punctuation, but the shape that a story takes on. Think about Kurt Vonnegut's theory that every story has a shape. So the premise of this paper is that the shape of AI stories are quite distinct from the shape that human stories take on. And they did test their methodology on 51,336 stories that were generated by 5 AI models. They compared it to 10,272 human stories. For this experiment, they used this database called Books3, which is a database of copyrighted books that's often used in fine-tuning AI models. So they picked out stories from that database, 10,272 ones. These are all human-written stories. Then they reverse engineered a prompt. So basically a prompt that could produce that specific story. Then they gave those prompts to 5 AI models and asked the AI models to come up with stories based on these prompts. And when they compared the stories that these 5 AI models wrote in comparison to their corresponding human stories, their findings were that AI stories tended to explain the theme of the story. AIs were very explicit. They didn't trust that the human will understand, so they will over-explain. They also found that AIs love linear stories with tight causal chains. So a story that's straightforward and the plot is following a cause and effect pattern. Another finding was that AIs do not like loose endings to stories. They will give you the mysteries, sometimes even at the beginning of the story. They will not leave you hanging. An interesting one was that AIs apparently overwhelmingly convey emotion through physical sensations and bodily metaphors. For instance, if a human writer would say that a character felt afraid, an AI model would write this fear as a tightening chest or a cold sweat. So very much over-explaining the emotion through sensations. I found that really interesting. Another one was that AIs avoid naming real things. So no mentions of real brands, real places. I think they're trying to avoid defamation here. They also found that AIs tend to write stories that are similar to one another. So if you plot it, the AI stories cluster around each other while the human stories are quite divergent and unique. A final finding was that the AI models tested seemed to have their own fingerprints of what their stories look like. Claude loves careful, consistent stories with quiet endings, very calm of Claude. GPT loves to gossip. So gossip is often used as a plot line in stories that GPT writes. DeepSeek will give you all the context at the beginning, no mysteries. It will give you the big reveal at the beginning of the story. Gemini likes clean endings, no loose endings, and quite interestingly, really dark and depressing stories. The 5th model, Kimi, basically had no personality. It wasn't really distinct enough. So you might be wondering, Garnet, why are you waffling about this Storyscope paper? How does it connect to the Serpent in the Grove? I decided to test the Serpent in the Grove with this methodology. I asked Claude to trim down the questions that the researchers asked, because the researchers asked about 304 questions. I wasn't going to be able to do that. So I asked Claude to trim it down to about 17 questions, still under each of the story building blocks we talked about. And then I asked 5 models to read the story and answer each of the questions. So for instance, what is the theme of the story? What is the time structure of the story? Is it linear? Is it circular? And then with each answer, there was a rubric of what an AI story constituted versus a human story. I have a doc linked that will show you all the questions I asked, the entire rubric I used, the scoring guide, and everything. But the findings were interesting. Claude felt that there was a mix of human writing and AI writing. DeepSeek also was mixed. ChatGPT, on the other hand, felt that it was moderately AI leaning, so some elements of human writing, but more AI leaning. Gemini and Grok, on the other hand, they scored this story as strongly AI leaning. As you can see, the models all agree that there are some elements of AI writing, but they disagree on how much AI writing is present in the story. And when I looked at where the models agreed and disagreed on, the models tended to agree on things that you could physically identify within the story, like whether they used a lot of sensory detail, whether the story was linear or non-linear. But they disagreed on the interpretation of things. things, like whether the theme of the story was very explicit or whether the allusion existing in the story was a direct reference to a specific book. The Serpent in the Grove uses a lot of Adam and Eve references, and the models disagreed on whether this was AI leaning or human leaning. So even with a different methodology, there's a lot of disagreement. But even when they agreed, I tended to think otherwise. For instance, back to the idea that models agreed on the lots of sensory detail. All 5 models felt like the writing was packed with smell, touch, heat, and sound. You can see how Jamir describes the environment, the damp earth, the sour tang of fermenting cocoa. It's very visual. And I disagree that this is AI writing, because when you're doing writing lessons, one of the first lessons you're taught is show, don't tell. And how do you show? You show with the 5 senses. You're supposed to describe the senses instead of naming the things you're seeing or the things you're experiencing. So for me, that's subjective. While Storyscope could say that that is a style that AIs prefer, I still think that is a very human element of writing. Another one was that the AI models felt like the settings of the story mimicked the character's internal state. The idea is that AI outputs are semantically tidy. The settings always mean something, whereas humans can sometimes just have a setting with it without it meaning something deeper. But once again, this is something I also disagree with. Symbolism is a stylistic feature that writers have relied on for years and years and years. I remember in high school, part of our literature lessons, we call it fasihi in Kiswahili, was trying to understand the meaning of the symbols. And you used to get extra points if you could draw a line across a story with even the tiniest of symbols. So I still think that is a human way of writing. These elements that the AIs felt was a sign of AI writing are, for me, a sign of a good writer. And so once again, that disagreement of whether this story was AI generated or not still stands. Because this is such a complex issue, it now turns into an AI witch hunt. I've done a video on this before where it's this phenomenon that's coming out of the creative spaces online, where creatives are expected to provide as much evidence as they can. It could be process videos, it could be Google Docs timestamps to show that they actually did something completely on their own and did not use AI at any point. But the reason why I call this an AI witch hunt is even beyond the provenance of the text, whether it's human or AI, but it's in the other things that people are looking at in determining whether this work is AI generated or not. One of the flags I have is like cultural gaps, where when people don't understand something, they immediately attribute it to AI. And I talked about it when I was talking about the metaphors section. Writing is deeply contextual, and people were debating the use of galvanize as a noun and not a verb. And Nazir writes, "Sun on galvanize is a cruel instrument. It beats until the roof talks back in a dry moan." So here he uses the word galvanize to mean corrugated iron sheet roofs. That's what they call corrugated iron sheets in the Caribbean. When he says it beats until the roof talks back in a dry moan, if you've heard the sounds the corrugated iron sheets or zinc sheets, if you're South African, make when it's really hot, they make a sound. So I understood that. But once again, I saw somebody complain about the use of galvanize, but also the use of the metaphor saying that the galvanize talks back in a dry moan. But I've heard the sounds. I can see why the author describes it. There was a cultural gap in how some of the people were analyzing the choice of metaphors, the choice of words, the choice of even stylistic device. Because at some point, I did feel like his work reminded me of Okot Pabitek, who's a Ugandan poet. His use of like the rain metaphor, it reminded me of this poem by this Malawian author, Rubadiri. A lot of things that you don't understand are probably cultural, and that's why you don't understand it, but it's easier for people to just write it off as, oh yeah, it's AI. That's why it doesn't make sense to me. But another reason why I think this is a witch hunt is that the judgment became more about the text, but about who he was as a person. So this whole search for his credibility went beyond looking at the text, but people now started to look for his social media history, trying to understand who he was and his views on AI. So people found his Facebook and found that he'd made like some posts about AI. They were like, oh, because he has positive views on AI, he definitely used AI to write this, which is crazy. It doesn't help that he submitted an AI generated or AI polished headshot to the Observer when they asked for his picture. But then again, honestly, as somebody who comes from the global south, and this is not one of those, oh, it's a global south thing, but I see how people use AI headshots because maybe they don't have a good enough camera. So they're like, okay, this will make me look better. But yeah, people said, okay, if he's using ChatGPT to make his headshot, then he definitely used ChatGPT to write this. I found an opinion piece by this writer called Chimazir Chika. He was really going into Jazir's history and questioning who this man actually was. And at some point, I could sense the disdain. The first page of Google yielded more than congratulatory messages from some Caribbean publications regarding his winning of the prize. Nothing else was visible or viable. No stories in magazines, no interviews, no books, no reviews, and critical analysis of his work, and no profiles, which is strange for an author of his age. It was not until the third Google page that a Facebook account attributed to his name appeared with a fair bio that read, "Writer, want a just and fair society for all with equality and good governance for my country." The main Facebook page showed no serious literary precedence. All the man does there is either comment on his country's politics or post poorly written, in quotes, possibly AI generated, poems and articles, sometimes tagged with emojis as bullet point, and in the case of poems, a note that the titles were generated using Meta AI. God forbid I write shit on my Facebook page. It will be used to judge my future writing. And there were so many points that I was just like, wait, what the fuck? The first one being that because Jazir is 61, how dare he not have any writing that we can use to assess, how he writes versus how he submitted the Commonwealth Prize. And if we were judging writers by this metric, then even people like Ballard, who got one of the most popular books this summer, would be judged, because Belle only started writing publicly in 2023 in Modern Love, and then the essay was picked up and she wrote a book that was published in 2026. If somebody looked at Belle Burden's history, they'd be like, oh, this book must be AI generated because I've never seen her writing. Or the other one where your Facebook posts are used to judge the quality of your writing and your submission to an official essay competition. I feel like there's that point where this person did not think, maybe this person submitted better work because it's a prize that demands a better bio, demands my work to be more structured, demands a better story. Like, the way I post on Twitter is definitely not the way I would write at work or write somewhere else. So in as much as I understand people looking for evidence, I find the simple ways this guy is being written off as a bit condescending. And the third sign of what I call this a witch hunt is that the organizers and judges were expected to have this knowledge of what AI writing looks like, and how dare they give an award to obviously AI generated piece of work. Like, can't you see this is AI generated? I'm gonna go back to the tweet where Nabil Qureshi says, I think this speaks very poorly of the judges of this prize because I could tell it was GPT in about 5 seconds. Like, God forbid you don't use AI and you don't know what the hell ChatGPT or Claude sounds like. God forbid. Now, not only are the author's credentials in question, but also the judges are being questioned for their credentials because they clearly don't know what AI writing looks like. And I have to point out that this is a bias from Tech Bros, because the flags about this piece being AI written first came from Tech Bros. Tech Bros don't understand that a lot of people do not use AI that often enough to understand the style choices of an AI chatbot. And so it's unfair to expect a bunch of judges to all immediately AI native and understand immediately AI style looks like, especially with how fast AI is developed. Today, I know Delve is supposedly a sign of AI use. Tomorrow, it's not, because they've fine-tuned the model and removed that kink because they know that people want to pass off AI-generated work as humans. So how are people who are not in the AI world supposed to know all this? And this is why I feel like AI conversations should definitely move out of tech spaces alone, because it's such an interdisciplinary issue. Like, now look at literary people who are now supposed to deeply understand what AI writing looks like. I found a Reddit post that really encapsulates this. It was somebody defining or describing this type of tropes you'd notice when AI is writing fan fiction. Apparently ChatGPT is obsessed with ozone. Everything smells like ozone. ChatGPT is obsessed with forehead touching, so no kisses, but the characters will touch foreheads, obviously because models are aligned to not produce sexual content. ChatGPT loves leather jackets. Of course, minimal to no cursing, that alignment situation. And in dramatic moments, ChatGPT loves to make the characters drop their cups of coffee or tea. This user also rounds it off by saying that ChatGPT can't write discriminatory characters. Even bullying is super lighthearted, which follows that story scope theory that AI models love to give a moral lesson at the end. Like even if they have a character who does something evil, they will give a lesson at the end because it goes against their alignment to give you an evil character and leave you like that. Also, back to the cultural gap, just a little segue. Part of the complaints I saw online was saying that this was AI generated was that the Nazir named his character Vishnu Muhammad. That, oh, how can a character have a Hindu name and a Muslim name? Do you know Trinidad? Trinidad is a country with mixed heritage from people who came in as enslaved people who were the colonizers, people who came in as indentured workers. So there's such mixed heritage in Trinidad. People in a creolized culture will have different names. It doesn't make sense to your world. In the Caribbean, where heritage is so mixed, it makes sense. Anyway, back to the situation where the organizers are supposed to know exactly how to handle claims of AI generated writing. But once again, this is a first for them. The organizers have never lived in a world where AI generated writing is so good that they are now struggling to separate it from human writing. So yeah, this whole situation has become a witch hunt. I'm here from the future to say at this point the AI witch hunt could have been stopped by the Commonwealth Prize, because the Commonwealth Prize said it did due diligence and looked at every winner's work and how they wrote that work, and it had them produce receipts about how they wrote this work to ensure that it wasn't AI generated. They said it involved looking at drafts, time-stamped documents and notes, and they said that they're satisfied with the testimonies. So if the Commonwealth just made this process public and made the receipts that the authors provided public, I think it would have quelled some of the witch hunt that's going on, but they didn't. And so it leaves mystery, and because there's an empty hole that needs to be filled with information, people go out of their way to find things that they think are telltale signs that Jamir used AI in his writing. Also, it would have been interesting because in an interview with The Observer, Jamir talked about how he uses a text-to-speech software for writing because he has mobility issues. It would have been interesting to see how they assess whether he could have used an AI for that, as he says that the only typing he does is at the final editing stages. So that would have been interesting. I understand Granta for not having 100% trust in the process. On one end, I'm inclined to believe them because I'm sure they want to protect their integrity in this literary space. But also on the other end, it could be them doubling down on it to save face, standing 10 toes down on their decision to prove a point. I think it's complex, but it's definitely clear that AI has changed the game. Trust in all these spaces is definitely broken. And the problem is that there are still no solid ways to determine trust, whether it's in job hiring, such situations where you have to submit written work. And I can see the anger. I can see people feeling like, the world is no longer, it was never meritocratic, but that AI is increasing this divide. Some people have access to really powerful models that can do so much and get them ahead of such competitions, while some people are relying on their sheer human creativity and human outputs, and they expect a fair review process. I wouldn't want to be a judge in any of this literary prizes this year or even the next few years until there's a whole solution for this. I wouldn't want to be in anyone's shoes. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you've read the story, do you feel that his work is AI generated? Do you feel like there's any space for AI in writing? And honestly, that should be another video because I have controversial views on this. Let me know what you think in the comments, and please do share this video to your peoples. Encourage them to subscribe, and yeah, see you in the next one.